Are you with us, Panayotis? Yes, I think you are. Dean of Architecture, Professor of Architectural Theory. And thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
And I think you had a perfect background with Andreas's presentation to come with your presentation on. I'm not quite sure. I think you should introduce your own presentation because it's. But when we did speak about it, I think we did talk about that it would be again about the contemporary city, and again about perhaps it would be also take a point of departure in the city as you know it, in Athens as you know it, and some of the issues which you feel are really relevant now. So thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you. It's true, I've been involved very much and still I'm involved in strategic planning of the public space in Athens for the last 12 or 15 years. But I have decided not to show you planning I was involved in during these years. I have no presentation. I'll discuss the public space in Greece. I'm very happy to be with you discussing that kind of Nordic urban place and presentations about Copenhagen. What is a public space? What is the space between buildings? I understand very well that public space is the space between private buildings, sometimes public buildings as well, but in between the two, there is a kind of filter which is separating the private and the public space. I would like to discuss that kind of public space, namely here in Athens, but taking back some kind of history. I remember very well that life in the public space depends on the habitats of culture, of climate and geography and time. 19th century, Europeans have discovered the flaneur, people who were walking in the city, looking around, taking fun of the city. Some centuries ago, some years ago, people never met the public space because even the idea of public space was very different. And in our days, public space is making a central field for discussion and design and life in the space of the city. The right to the city is linked to that kind of community which is gathering outside. I understand that Athens is a Mediterranean city, rather different from Copenhagen. And we are lucky to say that life outside is a rule for Greek people. I'm not very sure it's a real rule, but it's also part of our way of living. We are enjoying outside. Do we enjoy public space? That's a very good question. Looking back to the history of Athens, it's a very old city because of antiquity and because of the monuments. But it is also a modern city that was implemented in early 19th century under neoclassicism. And at that time, Athens was designed with perspectives and squares, with the kind of planning which helps people to follow access and have a view towards open areas like squares or monuments like the Acropolis and the part on the top of the hill. And this was, in a way, the perfect planning of a modern capital city with squares on the three areas of the main triangle, the Concord Square, the Omonia Square, the Constitution Square, and another one, the third, which is still missing. It is still to be implemented. That kind of planning was responding to a kind of life of a rather small city of the 19th century, and is still here as a form in the city, but we do not live anymore the form of the 19th century city. We are living in a completely different city. Here in Athens, one of the main characteristics is the dominance of the private. Most of the buildings, neighborhoods next to the city center or in the city center are private buildings answering to needs of private people. And the public space is the city outside the private. I would say, in a way, it is the city without the outside. May seem contradictory to say this. Athens developed in the 20th century and grew towards a huge metropolis. People densified every neighborhood, beginning with the city center, and we met from the early 60s with the car traffic. The car traffic was on the one side hell because of the traffic jam, and on the other side, paradise of the private car. Athens, the streets of Athens and squares of Athens became easily the territory of the car. The main streets of the city center are long parking areas, and the sidewalks are mainly for the use of parking machines rather than walking on the sidewalks. Not everywhere, but in many important areas. It is crazy to say that people understand the public space in Athens as the kind of network which is there to serve the traffic of their private cars. It is a functional city. That's a real contradiction. The neoclassical city is becoming a functional city. A functional city meaning a city where the outside is serving the traffic to get inside. We have even dreams, which are in a way crazy dreams. Let's give you an example. The main square of Athens, I mean the main because it was designed as the main square of Athens, the Omonia Square, the Concord Square, which is on the head of the triangle, which defines the modern city, has been for a long time a square where people was enjoying the life outside, but it was turned to a roundabout by the end of the 50s, early 60s, roundabout to serve cars and with a large fountain in the middle. After designs which redesigned that square to help people have some life on the square, the main nostalgia of the Athenians is to get back to the roundabout. If you are asking Athenian people how they would like to recover Omonia Square, most of them will answer, go back to the roundabout with a fountain in the middle, where nobody could walk. This was a fountain that was not accessible for people. It is a contradiction, but it has also to do with the idea that we can live outside but not in the public space. The public space has no importance because what is mostly important is the private. If there is any importance for the public space, it belongs mainly to the traffic or to leisure, which is connected with food and drinks. If you ask Athenians which is missing in Athens, they'll never say a public space where there would be no cars but people biking and walking around and enjoying life in the city. They will say we are missing green. Athens is a brown city with no green color, no trees. They will ask for public spaces, parks and gardens to enjoy the green color. But looking back to the city center of Athens, first of all from the Google Earth map, and then walking in the main street of Athens, the city center is an absolutely green center. Green areas are making a considerable part of the city center, and walking in the main streets of the city, you will meet rows and rows of plane trees, acacias, mulberries, orange trees, which during the summer and by the end of spring are covering the whole street. You are walking on shadow, but nobody can see the trees. It's impossible to see that you are living in a green city as well. I can see that there are neighborhoods with no trees, but that's another question. What do they do if they go outside? They are driving and walking on the sidewalks. It's not easy to walk on a sidewalk unless you are walking on the large avenues. If you are walking outside on a sidewalk here, out of the Polytechnic, Exarchia, which is a very central neighborhood, or next to that, to another neighborhood of the city center, it will be not easy to walk unless you are caring for every step. People who are elder or very young, people who are disabled cannot use the sidewalks. Cars are parking everywhere, and motorcycles as well. They are always on the sidewalks, and nobody cares. What means that the city is still a city without the outside. You will tell me, but who makes the city? Who designs the city? And why do we meet that kind of poor condition? There are no answers for everything. I understand very well that the city, I mean officially the city, which is an administration, and designs the place which depends on its power. But the main issue is the city that is designed by people who is living in between the city. I remember very well what young Gell was saying in his book, Life Between Buildings, that I have introduced in the Greek translation. And I remember very well discussing about Athens and Copenhagen with young Gell himself some years ago. If life is the real problem, life between the cities, then the public space is also designed by people who is living the city. I mean that the town planner or the mayor cannot design the life between the buildings. They can only design the built public space, keeping with architects and politicians and town planners' dreams, the green city, the walking city, all kinds of dreams. But what about the people? There is a kind of negotiation which has to make the public designer and the private designer, I mean people who is living in the city and people who is administrating, designing the city, to meet in a way, to have a common ground, to seek for common goals, for a place which is a place meeting both sides. In my mind, such a place is not occurring yet here in Athens. You are talking in Copenhagen about increasing the life outside by 20% in 2025. We are not having in mind increasing life outside in Athens. I mean, nobody's talked about that. I also understand that you have problems in Copenhagen with bikes, too many bikes in the city. I remember very well young Gell saying here in Athens that when he was young, there were no bikes in the city. What means that people have introduced as a common need, as a common will, the use of communication, of transportation, which is depending of human power. I mean, my food. If people is not really seeking for a city change in the public space, there can be no change on public space. What means that to have a public space, we have to open the private to the public. We have to demolish the walls which are separating both sides of the building, the private and the public. I understand that this is a kind of habitat that we have to earn slowly if we really need to earn that kind of quality in the city life. I remember very well that the right to the city is the right to be there all together in the main places of the city, in the city center, coming from all neighborhoods, all people, from all social classes. But the right to the city has to meet with the will of the city. The right to the city has to meet with the will, the dream, I could say, of the public space in the city. If they do not meet, so there is no place for a public space, but only the territory of the private and the city without the outside. Thank you.
Thank you, Panayotis. Thank you. It was very, very clear, very good. And I think follows up perfectly the other presentations. But this, this notion of it is a question also of psychology of the city, of the citizens. And also the question of the psychology of the city, and that one can't just talk about these empty phrases of the right to the city and the without talking about the will of the city and the dream of the city, which I think is very, very wonderful point to end on, and where this status quo is to come from, how to shift this, how to move on, where your references to both Jan Giel and also to Tina's presentation, in a way, cannot be directly used or exchanged because of the, as you say it, actually there is a sense of, it is a city which has defined itself as not having the outside, or does not want to acknowledge it has the outside, does not want to accept that it has also a commitment or responsibility for the outside, which I think is a wonderful way of looking at it. Thank you very much.